Hi there, welcome. My name is Christopher Ori, and I'm a TOSA with Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School District. And this is an experiment. This is a first-time recording of basically a podcast, or at least just an audio recording. My colleague Steph Rothstein, who's also a TOSA within the district, she and I have been bouncing around the idea of a podcast to interview our colleagues and record the stories of things that they are trying in their classroom, or things that they've been doing in their classroom that are really great, that are really good for students, and are the sorts of things that other colleagues could take on themselves and learn from. And so this is all part of this idea of one cool thing. And one cool thing is born out of this idea that we've all had that moment where we've seen something or experienced something and said, that is so cool, I've got to try that in my class. And we try it or in our own context, and it goes on to be really transformative in what we do. And the idea is that the more that we can share the things that we do, the more likely others will have those kinds of aha moments and maybe transform what they do. And so earlier this week I was passing by a collab class at Saratoga High School. Brian Eliot and Jennifer Lee, they collaboratively teach a biology class together, and they were doing this activity where they were stacking marshmallows. Their kids were stacking marshmallows on spaghetti, and kids were having a good time, and they were facilitating these conversations. And what they were doing was an activity that was setting up for a really meaningful process called a shared agreement. And so I realized in talking with them after that, hey, this is something that would be really great to share with colleagues. And this idea of a shared agreement actually came up earlier in the summer when I was at a PLC training, and the presenter was talking about before a school or a district begins the PLC process, it's very important to get all stakeholders together to create a shared agreement. I think they called it a collective agreement, but it's the same thing. Some people would call them norms, but I think they're even more specific in that they're creating, pooling together what everybody's values are, what's important to them, and then massaging those, combining them, and turning them into something that everybody, all stakeholders, in the case of that PLC process, all stakeholders within the school, but within a classroom, all students and teachers can agree upon. And so I asked Brian and Jennifer if they'd be willing to meet with me for 10 or 15 minutes to talk through their process. And so what follows is a recording of my interview with them, and they share their tips and tricks. I'm going to partner this recording with a blog post, so I'll talk a little bit about my experience with it, so you'll see that in the show notes. And then while I was observing them in action, I actually recorded a minute or two of Brian and Jennifer facilitating that process. So I'll upload this podcast onto YouTube, and I'll actually throw that little video clip in at the end, but I'll also embed that little video clip on the blog post. So what follows, again, is our interview. It's about just under 15 minutes, and then the recording of Brian and Jennifer doing their facilitation. So I really think there's a lot of really good things that they talk about in the setup and the why. I think that really is an important aspect. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn from it. And if you work with these teachers, if you see them, ask about that process, and if it's something that you're interested in, they can tell you more about it. You can follow up with your TOSA, or look into it. There's more resources online. So thanks for listening, and here we go. Okay, I'm here with Brian Eliot and Jennifer Lee, who are collab teachers in biology. Welcome, guys.
How's it going?
You guys want to just start off by just describing your class really quick?
Yeah, so the basic premise of our class is there's two teachers in a classroom, and I'm a special education teacher, and my primary purpose in the class is kind of the learning specialist in terms of helping students with multiple learning modalities, identify their strengths and weaknesses, as I also have a responsibility in curriculum and instruction in class as well.
Yeah, and my role is I'm kind of the primary biology teacher, so making sure that, I'm in line with what the rest of the department's doing science-wise in terms of lessons, curriculum, and GSS. But what's been really cool is that we really are trying to take this as a team approach and spending our prep time together or after school, like looking over lessons ahead of time, looking over lectures, reworking assignments to try to serve the needs of all of the kids in our class. It's our second year trying it, so we're still in a learning process, but it's been fun.
Yeah, and we could probably have a whole meeting, a whole conversation, a whole podcast on that process and the collab model and strengths and tips and tricks and all of that. But I wanted to really highlight on one thing that I know you guys did last year and then are doing right now in your class, and that's this collective agreement process. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so I think the real premise of shared agreements for us is we want to create a safe place for students to take risks, where they feel that their voice is valued and heard, and where they can really get to learning and get to those uncomfortable places where learning happens.
Yeah, it's something that I think, because we were new teaching together last year, we maybe didn't think to or take the time to set any shared agreements at the beginning of the year. We did end up realizing that there was a need for it, and like kick off the second semester, turned around and did it, which made a difference. But one of the changes we made this year was knowing that, look, early on, it's worth the time to take in class, have the conversation, and have the students kind of share out or collaboratively decide like what are their priorities in this space.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how you knew that you needed to do the process?
I think just general, there wasn't like this collective culture or classroom feel where everybody was included. And just it seemed that it was very difficult to get students to participate in classroom discussions. And then some of just like the normal procedures and functions of like moving in a class and getting materials and getting organized took a lot of instruction and time.
And I would say too that like the warning signs were different in each class because each class has its own personality. So, one of the classes that we shared last year, our first period, they lost so much transition time. Like it was like 15 minutes a day of like lost transition time. And that maybe wasn't the problem in a different class where we had students who were efficient, but they were independently efficient and weren't like doing the group part and helping each other clean up and like do the things that you're supposed to do together. So I think the beauty of shared agreements is the class can figure out what they need to have in place, and it might look different period to period.
Right. And I think coming from a perspective too of where we really saw it was important was that we have multiple levels of learners in our class, and being able to obviously extend to our higher level learners and then to target our lower level learners where you had these opportunities for growth.
And so just so we're clear for those listening, what exactly a collective agreement is. Can you describe exactly what that is?
So a shared agreement is, and we really teach this too. So what we do is this year, where it made it much more seamless, is we taught like the procedures and the rules of the class, because we really didn't want to get into that as part of the discussion. Like last year when we did shared agreements and we didn't have like that upfront work, students were like instantly went into, I need to raise my hand when I talk in class, and kind of just like the normal procedures and protocols of class. But a shared agreement is this thing that all the students value and the teachers value, that is something that we want to be part of our classroom culture, so everybody feels included and valued, but also at the same point feels safe to go into those uncomfortable places.
So it's literally 3 to 5 like lists of things that collectively you guys have come together and all sign on to. So can you describe the rollout of how you introduced to the idea of a collective agreement and then how you created it?
Yeah, so, last year it was kind of out of need because first semester was kind of rough between us being a new teaching partnership, and I was new here at the school, and we hadn't done really rules at all. So it came out of need, and we had a really honest conversation with the students that, hey, it's not too late for us to rework our classroom and improve ourselves. This year, because we did it third day of class, we kicked it off by actually doing a little design challenge team building activity. We happened to use the marshmallow challenge because we like that one and it's a quick and easy one. But it was their first time officially working in a group. We kind of threw them into it, and it was a great way to introduce the idea of shared agreements because you have this concrete example of what worked for you in this activity, what made you successful, what would you have done differently, and then asking them to bring it to a bigger point of view of, in general, in this class, if you want to be able to continue to act this way, try new things, do experiments, not always be successful, what are the big takeaway lessons from these last 10 minutes that you want to put in place year round for everyone at all times?
And I think really emphasizing too that, learning is a social process. It's not an independent. We really want to work as a team. And the activation of the prior knowledge by doing the team building activity prior really opened up the discussion that was rich with, some real creative ideas about what they wanted their classroom culture to look like, what was a space that they would want to come to as students, but also a place that we would want to be at as teachers and be a part of.
Yeah, that's really cool. I really like how you've created an activity, an environment where they're going to have to work collaboratively and they're probably going to fail, or at least they're going to make mistakes, and so then they can take from that the learning and then apply that to the real meaningful, more challenging labs and activities and projects you're going to do moving forward. That's really cool.
Yeah, and to your case in point too, there were absolutely groups that failed.
Yeah,
they couldn't even get the marshmallow, freestanding, but that was the rich part of the discussion is how did this not happen and why did it not happen and what could you have done to improve, and then looking at, well, there were some groups too that were successful and how were they successful, and then also that vulnerability of we made mistakes, but how could we have done it better and what could we have learned from everyone,
and why is it okay to not have it work the first time or even the second time?
So that makes me wonder what kinds of agreements they came up with. Some of the things that, were they really different from one another in terms of from each period to period, or were there common themes that came up?
I think that's kind of the crux of good teaching is, right, you want a class to go to a spot, and we gave them that structure to go there. And yes, I think each classroom has different personalities. I would say that our first period came up with a real rich list, and some of the shared agreements that we came up with. One of the ones that I really like was give people time to think and talk through their ideas. So allowing that time and space to, it's almost like students are saying, this is our way of giving peer wait time. That's a teacher term, but you hear students say some of the valuable teaching terms, and you're like, whoa, this is so cool. This happened without even us instructing or telling them to do it.
That's a really good reminder for us, because we often get in a hustle to get through things, but reminding us also as part of that shared agreement to take time and give them time to talk through their ideas.
And even this process involves that, because I think we spent, after the little challenge, we spent probably a half hour just brainstorming, and we had a couple of groups share out, then they had talk time, then we brainstormed, each group has to share at least one new one that's not on the board, so you end up with a list of 15 of them, and then there's more small groups to figure out which ones can you combine or lump together, which ones need to stand on their own, which ones are good but maybe don't need to be on our primary list.
Right.
And so it was about a half hour of that, and then in a follow-up the next day for another 15, 20 minutes. So even just as teachers, we can look at the list and think about which ones we value the most, but it might not be the ones the class wants to value, so giving them the space to be the ones to really narrow it down for the group.
Yeah. And then too, just the opportunity to brainstorm the list and then look and find the common themes, and then to disseminate it to what is, 5 or 6 core things that we want to do in this class and emphasize.
Right. And so I know when I've done this, and when I did it with Brian, when we taught together, we would do it on a poster paper, and we'd write it out, and kids would sign it. I see behind you guys that you have a whiteboard space for it. So what's the plan for these now? How's it gonna move forward?
Pretty much the same as what you guys used to do. I think really liking the idea that it's visual and that everyone has to sign, including the adults.
Mhm.
So we're gonna have next week kind of the final draft, make sure the class kind of approves it.
Mhm.
We'll have a couple of the students, volunteer to put the poster together for us, and we'll basically attach them to the board, and they'll just be there all year as a reminder for everyone.
And do you refer back to them ever? Does it ever come up?
Yeah, I wrap around to them quite frequently. I think Ms. Lee does as well. And it's just, if you see a student doing something positive, always, I like to be positive, like, hey, you are really sharing your voice today, or you're practicing active listening skills to your partners, or you were, whatever the shared agreement is, but referring back to that list and then pointing out in specific instances where they're practicing in a class.
One thing I'm looking forward to this year, hopefully, because we started it early on, is hopefully the kids holding each other accountable in a nice way, and them pointing to it and referring to it. I think started it late enough last year that it never fully implemented, but I would love to see the kids use it as a resource also for each other.
And it's very visual right there, so they're gonna see it as they're sitting here. Absolutely. So the last question I just have is, if any teachers on campus were interested in trying this, what advice do you have for them? I think it's neat that you did it late in the year and you did it 3 days into the year. So I hear you saying you could kind of do it any time, but on maybe a practical level, do you guys have any tips or tricks or advice for how teachers could do this in their own class?
I would just, one thing that was a definite learning part of it this year for me is having the activation activity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very key part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And also having a good, strong set of procedures and protocols in place prior to doing shared agreements.
Yeah, I agree, and I think my add-on would be, just find a time that feels appropriate to you. If you're feeling cramped beginning of the year and it's too rushed, it's, like I said, it's not too late to try it maybe a month in. And we debated this. We said sometimes it's nicer a month in because the kids know each other better and might have a better idea of what their priorities are. So
Or
I don't think
they've
it's a bad time to have this conversation.
Right. Or they've gotten a feel for kind of what the class is gonna be like. So now that they know, okay, this is what this class is like now, and I know how I'm interacting with it now, how do we come together? Yeah.
And then I think another tip or trick to it too is that knowing that each class has its own independent personality, and then creating the shared agreements around each separate class and how their individual characteristics.
That's really cool. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share this. I think it's valuable for our colleagues to hear, and I'm really excited to hear about the culture that you guys are creating in your class and what it's going to look like this year, and maybe we can check in later on in the year to see how things have gone or what's come up. But nevertheless, I think you guys have really created a great foundation to the year that's setting you up. And even though you may feel like you're getting a late start with the content for the course, it sounds like you guys are going to have a more cohesive class that will work collaboratively and maybe move faster. So it's really exciting. So
That's the goal.
that's the goal. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks
Cool.
for your time.
Thanks.
Feeling like I can take a risk in the class and I'm okay, and it's a place that you want to go to. So not necessarily you're going to the activity specific. This is more a general outline of what this classroom structure would look like. Yeah. Absolutely. So making decisions as a group, not as an individual. Very good. Yeah. Okay, I like it. Having a plan, right? So having some sort of structure to what you're doing and what's responsibilities. Really good. Yeah. Oh, Excellent. So never giving up, like that idea of perseverance, right? Moving through, even if you experience failure, right? But being able to do it, very good.